Hello everyone, and welcome to our session this afternoon, Getting Critical, hosted by the JS Group and in partnership with Macmillan. This is our first event in partnership with Macmillan. We do have some more coming up, and we will be sharing the links to that after the event. We're very excited to welcome Kate Williams to this event, and thank you very much for helping us to provide this content to students free of charge. So without further ado, I will pass over to Rosie from Macmillan to do an introduction as well.
Thank you very much for the intro, Jenny. I hope everyone can hear us. If you're having any issues, please do drop a note in the chat box. It's great to be working with JS Group on this series of webinars, and I'm delighted to be here today with both Jenny and with Kate Williams, who is the series editor for Pocket Study Skills and who founded the Upgrade service at Oxford Brookes University. Today, she'll be explaining what Getting Critical is and isn't, why you need to bring a critical dimension to your assignments, and also to your everyday life and things like your career planning as well, and how you can do this and adopt a critical mindset with plenty of practical tips that you can put into practice straight away. If you have any questions for Kate, then please do pop them in the chat box and we'll do our best to get through as many as possible at the end of the session. And for anyone who has friends who couldn't join or who's a bit worried about making notes at the same time as watching the webinar, the session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel after the event. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Kate, and I hope you all enjoy today's event.
Oh, good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for tuning in this afternoon to my talk, Getting Critical, which is the same title as the book, but of course, as we look at it like this, it's all back to front, which perhaps isn't ideal, but there we go, that's the webcam for you. My aim is to, as Rosie said, leave you with one or two absolutely ready to roll thoughts and tips and to approach what your studies with, and perhaps ideally leaving you thinking, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Well, let's hope that that's how it turns out. So getting critical, what, why and how, of those three, why is the really, really important question. And I think the why of it at one level is to really make your studies come alive and mean stuff to you and so on. A more prosaic reason is that the getting critical, the critical aspect, is associated with the higher grades, and it's a single quality, it has been said, that actually marks out the better work. But I'd like to focus on the satisfaction you'll get in feeling you're in control of your studies, and I think that comes through the critical dimension. I think probably everyone is familiar with feedback about being critical. And why be critical? Okay, this is a very pressing motivation. Feedback that highlights the need for it. Some feedback is more helpful than others. And I think feedback is probably a bit better these days with more online opportunities to engage. So, top right, you need to show more analysis in your work. Well, that actually is telling you something quite helpful, which is the importance of analysis. I would say analysis is the kind of springboard for criticality, understanding the elements of something, taking it apart. Down bottom left, you need to question the findings in more detail. That actually is more helpful. And it relates to, I would imagine, some comments that you made in relation to something read or some research. And all academics, all scientists, medics, we see a lot of this on the TV these days, questioning findings. It's a key skill, and it's absolutely critical in every sense of the word that you develop that confidence. We get other comments too, like your account is too descriptive. My feeling is that that actually is kind of feels a little bit more personal, and it's less clear what you've got to do to change it. Because when you see descriptive, you can think to yourself, I've kind of undershot on this piece of work. That is disappointing. But it doesn't tell you what to do about it. And the one here, bottom right, you need to be more critical, is a comment that I've seen on so many students' work over the years. And the reaction of so many students is, yeah, fine, I know that, but and that's what this talk and this book is about. Just before we get back to the critical thing, I just want to have a very quick moment on thinking about being descriptive, because that's the kind of flip side of critical. It's like this. How do I know I'm describing? Well, it's when you feel you need to tell me, the reader, the story before you can get to the point. You have to set out on your journey, and you're reading, and you're this, and then you go across here, and then you go up there, and you're beginning to think, yes, but they need to know a few more things before they can really understand what I'm about to tell them and what I'm about to say, and off you go, and there you are. Through the stop is the remedy. You've written a couple of pages, I hope no more than 2, before you realise you don't need to tell the story. You need to step up to being critical. We'll come back to what that means a lot later. But for now, let's take a look at this. So what does being critical in this context mean? Well, it doesn't mean. The English language is a strange thing. It's bad enough for people for whom it's not their first language, but even Brits, first language English speakers, Australians, associate finding fault, being critical, finding fault. It's not good enough. It's sloppily done. Could do better. Why didn't you, whatever it is? Actually, that is not what we mean by getting critical in this academic context. Then there's the other meaning of critical: key, decisive, important, crucial, a critical moment in an event, critically ill, tragically, a critical decision. Or for healthcare students, perhaps a critical incident, which you're being asked to analyse and work with. So, doesn't mean those. Then there's the kind of personal responses to this word being critical. Will I be offending the lecturers? They've given a lecture on something or other, but I've actually found an article I find more interesting and perhaps takes me places I'm more interested in going. If I write about this, will they be offended? No, no, no. They will be thrilled, because what they want you to do is to fly as an independent thinker, as long as it's based on research and evidence. Then there's the feeling of little me. You know, who am I to be critical of Shakespeare? Critical in the sense of negative? Well, never. But critical in the sense of being able to analyse in detail the text, the language, or the drama, or something historical. Yes. So critical again here isn't negative, it's positive. It's showing the craft of Shakespeare, showing the supreme, what makes Shakespeare great. And you're trying to lift that out of the text. and discuss it in your piece of work. And then there's this, I can't rubbish the methodology of all those eminent professors. Well, if you're thinking that, you may be a scientist or somebody in the STEM subject, not necessarily, of course, but the eminent professors have to end, it's a conventional science, you end with a section, limitations. What this research has not shown, what I have not been able to do, what, if I ran it again, I would dearly love to do. And that is an incredibly interesting starting point for you as a possibly science student, or indeed any other discipline to do. You're not rubbishing by showing what the limitations are. You're showing that you are a good and critical student. So, hey, it's not that one. Don't worry about Shakespeare, and don't worry about letters either. So what critical does mean is something that's much more doable. It's what we do all the time. We ask questions. We want to see that in your approach to your study. Question in the text. What's the that today and also in the book? Being thoughtful. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is a mindset. Those two linked together as a mindset, the baseline for successful study and for being critical. And then going on to digging deeper. That's research. When you're asking questions and you're being thoughtful, leads you to want to know more, then that's when you start undertaking your own research and reading articles, and you dig deeper to find answers. Well, possibly to find more questions. When you get in there, you'll see very quickly that all the experts have different approaches. I don't mean all, but most of them. You'll come across a lot of different approaches to understanding an issue. Great. The first thing is to be able to identify what these different approaches are. That's wonderful. That's being critical. That's what that means. That's what enables you to do. And then again, once you're in there, you will find yourself balancing up one factor against another, one thing against another, one approach against another, possibly with a view to saying this is the approach I want to take. But it's equally likely that you'll find that this is actually very helpful for this, and then this one, actually, that's a nice little tweak for that. So, back to asking questions and being thoughtful. Nothing is black and white. Nothing is cut and dry in that respect, in that way. It's also, nothing is absolute. And I want to ask you a question, and I would like you to note down your answer. So here we have a poll, and here you have a question. Should bikes be allocated the same road space as cars? Rosie, over to you.
So give this question or statement some thought. Have a think about where you would sit along that line that you can see on the screen. You've got from totally disagree on the one side to totally agree on the other. And a poll will come up on your screen in a moment. And we'd like you to select the response that's closest to where you would put yourself on that line. So we'll give you a couple of minutes now to have a think about that statement, think about where you would put yourself. Do you think bikes should have equal road space, or should cars have a lot more space than bikes, or the other way around? I can see some results coming in. We've got quite a lot of people actually who are either somewhat agree or somewhat disagree. And we've got a number that are saying they totally disagree with this, which is interesting. I'll give you all another 30 seconds or so to cast your votes, and we'll see what we've got. Okie dokie, so we have 5% of people today thinking totally agree, bikes should be allocated equal road space to cars. We have 35% saying they somewhat agree. 7% are sat in the middle on the fence, not quite sure which way. 37% somewhat disagree with this statement, and 16% totally disagree that bikes should be allocated equal road space to cars.
Oh, wow, that really is interesting, isn't it? Quite a range here. And what is interesting is the somewhat agree and somewhat disagree are pretty much the same. So the overwhelming majority of you guys out there are in the somewhat, or I would call it the yes but, or the no but areas, which is really, really interesting. Now, I'm interested in the 7 in the middle. I fully understand that this may not be a question you've ever thought about, and you've got all of about 2.5 seconds to think about it, so you go, oh, good Lord, I have no idea. If you'd studied the subject, though, I wouldn't expect you to sit there, because I would think to myself, wow, they've been studying this, and there is a very polarized debate, as we can see, because 5 people totally agree and 16 totally disagree. That's quite a polarized debate. So obviously there's kind of strong emotions involved in this, as well as powerful points of view. Now in the middle there, though, you would probably set out to do some reading, some research, to work out if you really were going to say, I've done all this work. I've done exactly what I meant to do for this assignment, and I've read loads and loads and loads, and I absolutely haven't got a clue. So I would say, broadly speaking, that's the place to avoid. You can come in, you can shimmy in just a little bit on the yes side, a little bit on the no side, but bang in the middle is probably not a place. It's a place that you would make a snap judgment on today, but in your studies you probably wouldn't. And also, if this was a study, if this was part of your program, part of something you've chosen to study, which I totally accept it isn't, so don't get worried or stressed about it. This is not anybody's assignment. The fact that a question is asked at all probably means that the answer is more complex than totally agree and totally disagree would suggest. So if you feel your instincts are polarized, just give it pause and see if after a moment or two you still feel that. But this is a really, really interesting exercise, and thank you so much for taking part. That's really great. And it leads us on very nicely to the issue of research and reading, because when you're presented with a topic that comes from out of space, as far as you're concerned, you're never given it a moment's thought. You then need to start reading and researching and getting critical in your reading and research. And this is where the 5 qualities in the bubbles will play their part, as does reading, as do reading lists, which I'm sure you absolutely love. I think reading lists have got better in recent, I was going to say years, but I'm probably going to say months, because I think as courses have changed in their delivery, they tend to be perhaps a little bit more structured than before. The tutors will have categorized perhaps into essential, and enrichment might be, I've seen on some programs. I've seen, or to prioritize, I've seen essential, optional, explore as the structure put on your, not just your reading list, but your viewing list and so on. So I think the old-fashioned reading list is undoubtedly alive and kicking. You undoubtedly will learn to deal with them, and you will undoubtedly need to learn how to prioritize yourself, although certainly, at least in the short term, I think a lot of prioritizing, more prioritizing the academy. Okay, now the next slide is not a poll. The question is, are you a happy sponge? Or are you, sorry, I got that round the wrong way. Happy sponge is fine, or are you a hook? The sponge is, I just really need to read everything just in case I miss something that's really, really important. And the hook in this context is, I'm looking for something to read. I'm looking for what I need for my assignment. I'm looking for something that will support an argument. And I think we're both a little bit both. We're all a little bit both. But I want to look at the life of a hook. A strategic approach to reading is where the hook takes you. And I'm suggesting you invest a few minutes in really looking at your text critically, with a view to getting a sense of what it's about and what it can offer you before you commit time to actually reading. And time spent on the surveying, the title, the subtitle, which can be quite illuminating, the blurb, which comes from the publishers, which focus on marketing, but it does help you to know what it's about. Also, books and pick up about them. Data publication is interesting because where there's a textbook, for example, I think you'd want to find the most recent. If it's a classic, I don't know, classic psychologists in the 1950s that you need to know what they say, then of course the date is important because it has a different importance. And you look at the content, you see what the book's about overall, the index is specific, and then in a minute or so, just move on, get an overview, the abstract, chapter summary, beginning and end. Look at the arrows down those series of boxes. Don't read the middle, don't read the paragraphs, skip through the headings and subheadings, boxes and diagrams, and the introduction and conclusion. And if you really are thinking, I'm going to commit time to this, look at the first sentence of the paragraph, and you should have an outline. And I think it really does help to spend a bit of time doing that and finding a whole load of stuff that you're not going to read. Okay. Asking yourself as you go, how is this going to help me with my task or my topic? Right, so when you do commit to reading, you may find something like this. Understanding different approaches is the heading that came up. And you won't find anything like this because it's a discussion about what makes the best tomato sauce. Fresh tomatoes or tinned tomatoes. And we've underlined here has Hildebrand and Jacob Kennedy's Geometry of Pasta is the only book to call for fresh tomatoes, so that's what I've done. Richer flavour of those made with tinned tomatoes, especially when well reduced, as in Gray and Rogers' version. I don't think there's any need to puree them. Now, I don't think, you don't expect to find that in an article, research article. This isn't a research article as such. This isn't a research article at all, but the process is the same. And it's a great relief, isn't it, to see there in the middle of this little extract, a voice speaking to you. I don't think we're going to need to puree them, as Galetta recommends. Any lumps that remain can be made more interesting texture. American chef Mario Batali adds a hefty amount of tomato puree, etc. Now, what we have here is a very, very miniature snapshot of what you find when you start researching. We have 4 significant sources in the field, chefs and chef cookery writers. We have 1 chef or cookery writer. Oh, I think they're a cook, aren't they? I don't think. It looks like they do tomatoes and tomato sauce every day. Offering us a view. Now, your view as a student writer or as a researcher is going to be less obvious, but your perspective, your thoughts, your outlook, and the way you string together your sources is really quite like this. And I have confidence actually in this chef. I don't know who it is, him or her. I feel that if whatever it is she says, which is tinned, I feel kind of confident that she's done the research and I can rely on her research in my thinking about the subject. So understanding different approaches is in your reading and research. That, of course, is one of the bubbles that we had earlier. This is the kind of thing that you're going to encounter. Understanding different approaches and asking questions is very much in the core of my Getting Critical book. These questions are useful in all sorts of contexts, starting with this extract was taken from an early page in the book, where I'm inviting the reader to really think good and hard about the task that you've been set, so that you know exactly what you have to do. What form is it an essay? Is it a report? What's the difference? How long does it need to be? That is actually so important. And any guidance about style. And also, how much is it worth? If it's worth 10%, will you spend as much time researching it as if it's worth 30? All that will be there for you to pick out. But just spend those minutes, oh, I don't know, half a minute or something, picking it out. Look at why, have a think about why you're being asked to do it. What learning outcomes that it needs. What your private purpose is. Are you doing the groundwork for something you want to continue later? Who your audience is? Well, your tutor's always your audience. What do you know about them? What do you know about what they like or dislike or what they encourage? And the team of tutors, let's not personalize it too much, because after one module, an introductory module, you'll find yourself doing other modules, you'll be picking up a sense of what the academic requirements are. And then you have various, there are all sorts of how questions, style of reference and use of appendices, and so on. When questions, deadlines, draft deadlines, always very good. If they send you, if you're allowed to send a draft in, oh, do that, and then you get lots of feedback so that you improve the kind of product. And again, where you get your research from? Is this entirely an online thing, or is there some practical stuff that needs to have to go into it? And from that point on, you have your action plan. Interestingly, if you're in healthcare, these 6 questions are tweaked and I've got this tweaking again in this one here, those 6 questions are called the 6 critical thinking questions, I think. And you can base your critical appraisal on these questions with particular details added. So they're a record. These serve you in very, very good stead in all your research and reading. But at the end of the day, the biggest single question is the so what. So what? What are the implications of this? What does this mean? What does it mean for me as a teacher? What does it mean for me as a healthcare worker? What does it mean for my patients? What does it mean for the development of this particular field? Where does it sit in the broader picture of things? So what? And then the absolutely critical one, I mean that in the sense of important, crucial. Am I going to use this material in my assignment? And if so, how? So, your research and reading ultimately all ends up with you, how you're going to use it, and indeed if you're going to use it. Now, the final section, I'd like to leave you with a few handy tips. Study, I should call it something grander, shouldn't I? Strategies for study. Is getting critical in writing here. And if you think back for a moment to these call-outs on the first slide, every single one of these were points of feedback from written work. So yes, there are forms of assessment are becoming more diverse. You have presentations to a greater extent. You have skills, you have various things, but fundamentally, most of your assessment of you and your work comes through your written work. And there is always a question. Now we've seen that already, questioning approach. The question isn't always as obvious as fear, or indeed as obvious as the bug and the card question. But hidden away in the wording, and I have obviously chosen the most accessible example of an assignment format, which is an essay with an actual question, mark. Because it's a presentation, you haven't got the time to read it. But to what extent is the notion that hangs behind all of these? So how far will that chapter have to say that? Do you agree that? The answer is never going to be yes or no. How successful is it? Not at all. Can this be said to be done? Can this be done? Even something that appears to invite you to polarize, or has got that to what extent question hanging in there underneath. This here is an example. Again, I do appreciate this is a classic, and not all assignment tasks are like this. I know that all well. But just have a look at these. To what extent do you think living in a risk society with uncertainty that you can bet your bottom dollar it's not an easy definition? We should radically change our ideas and practices. Well, which ideas, which practices, radically, deeply, just a little bit, in relation to economics, progress, and modernity. Again, if you're doing this subject, you'll know what they mean. You'll know that they're a big concept. You'll know that they have to, each one of these has its own debate within it. But we do know where you're going to end up. You're going, in the body of the essay, or you will be defining and discussing those terms, But at the end, you are going to end up on the sliding scale, somewhere between there and 4, and yes, totally. Even if it's just like 99%, 1%, 5%, 90%, you're going to end up there. And it's really worthwhile when you're planning your work to see the end. Don't start writing until you know where to go. That's kind of so obvious, like you walk out of your front door and think, oh, okay, this is where I'm going. You do actually go out to buy some bread. You change your mind, but you're always purposeful. Same applies with an essay. You're always purposeful. You always think you know where you're going. If you're suddenly going somewhere different, you replan. Okay, that's a sort of essay tip. And each of these areas here is going to be a section in your essay, a collection of paragraphs. And writing good paragraphs is probably, I'm saying it's a critical skill in the sense of getting critical, but the sense that we're using it today. It's also critical in the sense of absolutely essential, because a paragraph is the core unit of an essay, and you assemble them in your planning. So here's a little picture I drafted, and talented artists do it for me. I have wondered if I got it quite right, but here it is. The title is the book that holds it all together, from which it all flows. You can see the rings, the paragraphs all interlinking, and you can see the thread, or I'm going to call it argument. You see the thread that connects each paragraph, the introductory paragraph to the title, that connect one paragraph to another and leads you to a conclusion, which comes back to the title, which echoes the title and reflects it, and reflects where you've got to with it. Anyway, enough of the picture. So how do you know you've written a good paragraph? Well, try this. Take a page of your writing, or more than one page, and turn it upside down. Upside down, of course, you can't read it. Great. All you can do is look at it and think, I don't want to read that. That first one you're looking at with that great block of text, I don't want to read that. I wouldn't want to read it if it was the right way up, because it looks like a great splurge of ideas that have somebody has just poured out onto the page, hasn't structured them in any way, and hasn't shown you when they've moved on to a new point. It's off-putting, and I suspect lecturers who probably skip from topic sentence to topic sentence, working their way down to an essay, probably might read the topic sentence and then think, oh, I can't read this. The remedy is very simple. Turn your page the right way up and look for when you move on to a new point. This is a little trick. If you can see my fingers. Keep it bent. If you've got a huge hand, use this common sense. And that space there is where you start to look. If you've got all the way down that path and you haven't found a new point, well, give it another line or two and see if you can find one. If you're on the same point for this much, you should be writing a PhD or something. That's pretty good guidance. So on that basis, I would say I can see probably that great big long bit will divide into about 3 paragraphs. And then you need to check that the topic sentence is really clear. Add one if they don't come naturally. And you've got something that is inviting to read. The one on the other side, however, looking at all those itsy bitsy bits, gives me another message, which is you have a shopping approach to ideas. Just a whole load of points. You can't develop an argument properly in those kind of mini bites. Look at it, look and see if you can link them together. Again, a bit of editing will be necessary, topic sentence, and make sure that each collection, now paragraph, has its own focus. That is a core writing skill which you can practice leave us today. Well, not quite. I hope that you have a couple of points to take away. I hope that, sorry, I missed this. This is worth saying with. Pop back to what the paragraph is supposed to look like. Okay? It's inviting to read. It's a little bit bigger. I can almost read a few bits. And it was about 3. And that actually is about that. Apologies. So, a practical writing skill, and I hope you are feeling more confident about what getting critical is, and are able to move off. It isn't scary. These are probably things that you do anyway when you're shopping, in life, but I'm not pretending it's exactly the same, because asking questions, being thoughtful, and then jumping off into the research, digging deeper, looking for the differences in approach and understanding them, balancing one thing up against another, and then ultimately thinking back to the tomatoes, feeling that you're in the middle of something you actually can control, in the sense that you can align yourself with one way of thinking, one author. You can distance yourself from other approaches and just chart your own line through your life. Enjoy. And I think you'll find, if you can follow some of these tips, that you're enjoying your work more. It's more fun than you can think. Now, thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us. I think I have to press the button a few more times and say a few words about the pocket study skills. I came up with this idea for a new series of books, a new approach to the books, having, rather than having a big fat book on study skills, having a book this time. Okay, it is a pocket size, it is a hand size, it does fit in the pocket, and they are on specific subject areas. There's overlap between them, of course there should be, but each one has its own focus. My aim is that each book starts from where the student is, not from where students were 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but in terms of coming into study, taking your study skills where you are now. Less is more. Small books are better than fat books. Short sentences are better than long sentences. And a picture's worth 1,000 words, as they say. So in pocket books, we do aim to show, not tell. And I must say, I think that was the start for me, coming across students being told to do something rather than study skills, when actually what people really needed is models and pictures, perhaps, which will just help you engage with it and think, yeah, I've got that. Thank you. Aha.
Thank you very much, Kate. I will pass over to Jenny to just introduce the competition that we have today in this webinar.
Yeah, hello again. So we have 2 copies of Getting Critical, which we are giving away to attendees for free today. Rosie will be doing a lucky dip on the attendees that are here right now, and when we announce the names, Rosie will be in touch with you to arrange the delivery of these books. So fingers crossed.
Yes, indeed. So do we have Trisha Hill and Fred Orondo? I will be in touch with you both after the webinar, and we'll get your free copies of Getting Critical sent to you, and hopefully they will make a difference to your university studies.
Congratulations.
Yep, I hope you've all taken lots away from Kate's session. It was certainly very informative and practical, and if you've got any questions, then please do put them in the chat box or the question box, and we've got another 10 minutes or so to get through as many of your questions as we can. Perhaps while you're all racking your brains for a question, we could start Kate off with one. So could you perhaps tell us a bit about the questions that your students have come to you with over the years, Kate, and what advice you've given them for their assignments and projects?
Oh, yes. Okay, I certainly start with one very readily. It was a Spanish student in a postgrad group that I was running, and we were talking about reading. And she sort of said, "Oh, I can't do all this reading. I mean, I'm terrible at reading. I'm absolutely dreadful at reading. I'm so slow. I can only read one word at a time, and I just can't get through it all." So she said, "What I have to do is I get 10 articles, and I go through them all very quickly, deciding which ones I'm not going to read, and then I pick one I read." And I just thought, I mean, to be honest, I think she might have had something contributing to that slide I showed you, the page about skim reading, getting an overview. She's so right, and we were all very admiring because she was very absolutely on it. No way was she behind anything. So I thought that was the best advice I'd ever received back from anybody. That's the one that comes to mind, and I do actually think the thing about planning an essay. Now, I don't do detailed plans. I'm just going to give you a quick scan of an essay. So just get the outline. When I sit with a student, I always make sure they leave with a sheet of A3, and we have various bits, probably this sort of thing, an introduction and a conclusion. And this is the sort of, that's kind of what a rough plan looks like. This is the intro, which I would always say write last, because you don't know, if you don't know where you're going to end, how can you begin it? So start with not the introduction, but the beginning of the body, and then work your way through the body areas, so to speak. Plan your conclusion, and feel free to change your mind as you go. And then when you've finally got there and you've written your conclusion, then go back to the introduction and write it. Because when you write your introduction, once you know where the conclusion is, obviously, there'll be no, you can foreshadow it, you can set it up when you know where you're going to end, which is much harder if you don't know where you're going to end. So, 2 thoughts on students. I'm always grateful to students because they're the people who give me my material.
Indeed, we've got an interesting question from Sonia today. It says, how can you be critical without being personal?
First of all, you have confidence that you're, I think this is the one about that feeling about, you know, criticizing Shakespeare or rubbishing research and so on. It is being critical in terms of being able to pick your way around, pick your way through research, identifying the similarities and differences, perhaps, between different pieces of work, different pieces of research. And also, if you're, as a student, writing assignments, using your assignment to help you to justify developing an approach yourself, but you are never being personal. You're looking at what somebody's work and looking at the differences between this one and another. I mean, I do understand, and I certainly have met many students who feel that, you know, do you remember the slide about will my lecturers be offended? A lot of people feel that. And I think the opposite is the case. When lecturers can see students researching for themselves and finding different material, finding different case studies and thinking this is really helpful for me in this context, are probably, I mean, I could be wrong. I've never met a lecturer who wasn't delighted. I'm not suggesting there aren't, but I don't think you need to either be personal or think you're being personal if you follow the kind of approach that I've been suggesting today and that is developed more fully in the little book.
Fab. We've got quite a few questions actually that point to, you know, the difficulty of there being so many examples out there and how many do you include? And one of our questions is, you know, how can you be critical about numerous points and angles and different dimensions with a small word count? What advice do you have there, Kate?
With a small word count, well, a word count is kind of your friend, because if you're doing a 500 word, I don't know, maybe a blog or something like that, just work out what you can say. If you were doing something like 500 words, you'd have, I mean, think paragraphs. There won't be paragraphs because they'll be so short. But if you think 1, 2, 3 points in the middle, very short conclusion, very short intro in that order, then you just have to be very selective. And you have to know where you end so that that informs your choice of material you're going to include. Word count is always your friend in the sense that if a short word count, long word counts I worry about rather more because it's an opportunity to get lost. But a short word count is great because that is what they want. Something I've often said is, you know, if you're going to go into town this afternoon, the chance would be a fine thing in the last year, but anyway, and you say, can I get you anything? And I say, yeah, could you get me a white t-shirt for my workout? And you come back with an evening dress, I'm going to go, well, that's actually a great evening dress, but what am I going to wear in the gym? If you're given a short work count, you're being given a white t-shirt, you're not being invited to do an evening dress. So treat this as completely your friend. This is what you're going to get. Organize, organize, organize. 1, 2, 3, finish, start. Am I being too simple? Do feel free to come back if you get the chance.
We have another question about noticing gaps in the research and whether noticing these gaps and commenting on them demonstrates being critical.
It really, really does. Noticing gaps is the name of the game. And that's particularly, I don't know if you're a master's student or a postgrad of some sort, but identifying the gaps is your great opportunity. If you're a research student, it is your great opportunity, because if you find the gap between stuff that is really well researched and you've really done your work and you're right about this and there really is a gap there and there isn't something out there that you've missed, that could be a really nice little project. And pointing and demonstrating how you found your topic through your quite meticulous, research, that's kind of part of your methodology, actually, isn't it? So that's a great opportunity. Finding gaps in research when you're, if you're beginning studies, I would say just take a second look to see if there's something very similar to what you're trying to do. You can draw approaches from this and draw approaches from that. But I certainly, and there may be something you're missing, but if you're getting further on in your studies and you find the gap, I think, yeah, great. And if you have the opportunity to do some work there, that's marvelous. If you don't have the opportunity to do some work and you're just identifying a gap, then I think that the need for further research is something that is a very good way to end a lit review, for example. If you can point to gaps in the research that need further research, and you don't have to do it, but you are looking at an area that is more sparsely populated with research, for example.
One question we have from Sarah is, what's the best way to detect weaknesses in articles that you're reading or book chapters that you're reading?
I suspect it slightly that this is there's lots of conventions in your subject that I think that are helpful. You'd need to look at the methodologies. In many subject areas, healthcare and the sort of STEM subjects, of course, the methodologies and the weaknesses and the limitations are absolutely part and parcel of the whole thing. So in that sense, it's quite straightforward. It's more straightforward because it's part of that's part of the discipline. It's part of what you do in those subject areas. And if you want a current example, if you listen to the scientists, the medics on COVID, there's so much they don't know, and they're pretty upfront about saying we actually don't know this, and I mean they're in the position to set up a research group to find it out, but that's not the same thing. But you think the better of them, don't you, when they say we actually don't know, than rather trying to drag it through. So where you find weaknesses, it kind of depends what you're doing, but I think it's kind of great when you can, because that is your in.
We have a question, perhaps one last one to finish us off, that says, do we write critically when presenting or writing a report? And how is that different from writing an essay?
Right. A report, there's a book called, Report Writing in the series, which is fantastic, by Michelle Reed. It's really, really good. I'll grab a copy at a moment. A report is an investigation, and it's usually linked to, is often linked to business subjects, and certainly science subjects. And you carry out an investigation, and it's likely that the first section will be sort of outlining, how should I say, framing your inquiry. And you will have, if it's a business one, you will have looked at, okay, the business textbook, you'd have looked at company reports, you would have looked at any primary research that's been done in the field. So you kind of frame the report, which is usually about something you've done, and then you would move in closer to either something that you've actually done yourself or an analysis of the company literature or something like that. But the most obvious difference is in how it's set out. And I think that's an example of where, if you read the instructions for your assignment really closely, you should find you've got some really clear sections, and what you do in each section is kind of different, moving from, if you like, framing the problem to, in your conclusion, setting out options for action or options for the way forward, with possibly just having and the middle would be maybe a discussion of how to move forward. And there you'd be hooking it, because it's business studies, it's not actually business being in business. You would be looking at the literature to help you, to show your general understanding of the topic area, which forms the context for the kind of the recommendations you might be making. But have a very good look at the instructions you've been given, and I do think it's worth having a look at Michelle's book, Report Writing, because there are different sorts of reports in different subject areas, and without knowing a little bit more, it's hard to say more. I'll just jump off and get a copy of that.
Thank you very much, Kate. And thank you to everyone who has submitted questions and who has joined us today. We're at 3 o'clock or just over now, so we'll bring this session to a close, but please do keep an eye out on your emails. You will be sent a link to the recording of today's event, and keep an eye on the John Smith JS Group Eventbrite page and our social media channels for updates about upcoming events over the next few weeks. Thank you very much for joining us. Kate, did you have one last word?
Yes, just to say thank you for tuning in, and thanks enormously for the questions, because they were really good questions. Thanks a lot. All the very best.
Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the afternoon, everyone.